The comment, he said, if you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. And he is 100% correct. And I think today they are telling us some pretty big whoppers, hoping that we will believe them. Things like evolution. Things like you were born that way or that gender is fluid. Guys, I hate to be the one to break it to you. My background, I spent 23 years in school. I've got a doctorate in anatomy and neurobiology. You know what we've never found? We haven't found a gay gene. We've done the whole human genome. We haven't found a gay gene. Not only that, when I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, there were two genders. You know how many there are today? You know how I know that? So if I were to teach you forensic pathology, and let's say you found a skeleton out in the woods, if you were good at your job, within 3 to 5 minutes, you could tell me if that thing was male or female. Do you know how many other alternatives we found? 0. Why? Because God created us with XX or XY chromosomes. And no matter how many surgeries you have, how many pills you take, guess what? It's not going to change that. And rather than us encouraging folks living in that world, we really need to start figuring out, why do we have so many young people who are wanting to escape the reality that God gave them and are struggling with mental problems now? That's where we need to spend some time talking about this. If we were to say, all right, what kind of evidence do we have that there really is a God, that the creation is true? If I were going to prove it to you all, so let's say that my job was, Brad, we're going to pay you to prove that there is a God and that he created everything. First thing I would do is I would get you outside to look at his actual creation. Which, by the way, parents in the room, I didn't mention this today, going to mention it now. It may be that you need to take the screen down away from your kids and get them outside in God's creation. Because that screen is actually hindering them from seeing God's invisible attributes that are all around us. So we would see things like the diversity of plants. We would see all kinds of things like animals. In fact, let's say we're out on a hike together. We come across this little guy right here. Now, you look at that and you think, oh, that's a cute little frog. I look at that as a scientist and I think, oh, this is a great learning opportunity. And so what do? I would scoop that frog up. I would bring it right back in here and I would put it in a blender. And I would invite maybe the lady back here on the back row, I would invite her to come up and turn on the on button. What would we get? He said a mess. We would get frog juice, right? Now, follow me for just a minute. If I put that solution into a container, I put a top on it, could I honestly say I have everything it takes to make a frog? Got every protein, every bit of DNA, everything needed, right? So I toss it to you. How long would you have to shake that up to make a frog? Or how much electricity would you have to zap it with in order to get a frog? Everybody in here right now is thinking the same thing. And that is, you're never going to get a frog, right? In fact, all you're ever going to have is frog juice. Now, think about this for just a minute. I'm actually giving you a head start because I'm putting everything it takes into one container and asking you, hey, just make a frog. And yet, they want us to believe life started in some primordial soup, and that lightning hit that, and out of that up came a If you can't get a frog with me giving you every protein, every bit of DNA, how in the world are you going to get one from that? You can't. And yet again, we're losing our children. Take a look at the quote on the screen behind me. It's from a young man who was raised in the church, spent 18 years worshiping every Sunday morning. He was active, doing mission work. He said, I grew up in a Christian home, but I felt like there was not enough evidence to support a belief in any kind of God. I believe it makes more sense to be an atheist. Why do I show you that? I show you that because it is very possible for our children to be here physically, but mentally, they're already gone. And so one of the things that we've got to do as parents and grandparents, as nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, we got to make sure that they've got the evidence that there really is a God and that He created everything. I went on a Bible study with a guy, this was several years ago, before we actually owned a coffee shop. We were sitting in a coffee shop. This guy was a complete atheist, had no belief in God. By the way, what does an atheist look like? It looks like us. They don't have like horns and a black cape, okay? This guy, believe it or not, he was actually a pretty decent human being. But I asked him, I said, look, help me understand, how in the world do you explain like where everything came from? What's your worldview? He said, Brad, clear your mind of everything. I said, all right. He said, that's what was here before the Big Bang. He said there was literally nothing. He said it was like a void in space. I looked at this dude, I was like, all right, you're trying to tell me there was like nothing. Then what went bang? You know what this guy told me? He literally looked across the table and said, well, the nothing went bang. I said, all right, time out, hold up. You're telling me that there was nothing, literally nothing, and then on some random day, like a Tuesday at 11:37, that nothing just spontaneously decided to go boom, and we got all this stuff, this material stuff. He said, uh-huh. I said, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Because that requires a whole lot more faith. You know what he did? Crossed his arms, leaned back in his chair. He said, all right, where's your proof there's a God? I literally just popped my shoe off, dropped it on the table. I said, there's your proof right there. Now, he looked at me the same way some of you guys are looking at me right now. He said, how in the world is your shoe proof that there's a God? I said, well, would you first agree with me that my shoe is real, that it really does exist? It's not some piece of imagination. He made a snarky comment about, yeah, we can smell it. I said, okay, all right. I said, using logic, there's only 3 explanations for that shoe. Option number one is my shoe has been here forever and it will be here forever. It's eternal. Or option number 2, I'm just walking down the sidewalk one day in sock feet, and out of the blue, boom, there's a size 11.5 right there on the sidewalk. Or option number 3, it was created. He kind of chuckled at me. He laughed. He said, well, we can tell your shoe's not eternal because it's wearing out. I said, you're right. He said, I'm not gullible enough to think that it popped into existence on the sidewalk. He said, Brad, obviously your shoe was created. What's that have to do with God? I said, you're willing to admit that my shoe was created? He said, yeah. I said, okay. Let's talk about the shoemaker. Was the shoemaker eternal? Did he pop into existence on the sidewalk? Or was he created? And I watched, quite literally, the blood in this guy's face just start going away. Because he realized he was betting his whole worldview on the idea of me walking down the sidewalk and boom, there's a size 11 and a half. Except for him, it wasn't just 11 and a half. It was the entire universe. And he realized, you don't just get shoes by mistake. There has to be a creator. If I were to tell you that ink drops just started randomly, I know we're in Phoenix and it doesn't happen here, but think that there's like rain, okay? But instead of rain, it's ink drops, and they're hitting blank pages, and those ink drops are actually spelling words. Not just words, whole sentences with grammar. A whole book of it. You would think I had lost my mind. And yet, let me ask you, what about the book of our DNA? How did that come into being? I mean, we joke about the chicken and the egg, but it's an actual real problem for an evolutionist. Which came first? Because if you say the chicken came, or the egg came first, understand you got to have a rooster to fertilize that egg, right? We have 5 chickens at home. We do not have a rooster. There's a reason why we do not have a rooster, okay? Because I only want 5 chickens, and I don't want to hear cock-a-doodle-doo every morning. All I want are the eggs. In order to get a fertilized egg, you've got to have the hen lay it and the rooster to fertilize it, right? It's crazy. They really literally are talking out of both sides of their mouth. Out of one side of their mouth, they're saying, hey, there is no intelligent design, okay? There is no designer. But then you sit through a college class and you take a test on the nervous system and how complex the nervous system is. It's like, wait, I thought you just told me there wasn't any intelligent design here, and yet the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, the nerves, is far superior to any fiber optics you've got in this state, I promise you. And it's faster. And oh, by the way, it's made up of living cells. Understand that what they're doing, moms and dads, listen to me, they're not taking direct shots at Jesus Christ. Because can you imagine the uproar that would happen if a teacher walked into their classroom and said, Jesus wasn't real? Hopefully people would get a little bit upset about that. Now, I'm not convinced of that, but hopefully they would. But they will teach them this earth is billions of years old. Dinosaurs walked the earth before man, and they will completely undermine the opening chapters of this book, which ultimately is what the cross rests on. Because if you take away Adam, you take away Eve, you take away sin in the garden, then you've just undone the whole scheme of redemption and the need for a Savior. So, do I think it matters? Yeah. Let's talk for just a few minutes about how we got here, where we came from. If you open a textbook today, the leading theory is going to be that Big Bang, right? 2 choices, either somebody made everything or the world made itself. Now again, when you open the textbooks, over and over again, Big Bang Theory, Big Bang Theory. By the way, do they ever tell you who pulled the trigger on the bang? No, they start pretty much mid-bang, right? But stop and think about it for just a minute. Where did the matter for that Big Bang really come from? In fact, if you look carefully at the bottom of this particular page, notice what it says. In a closed universe, a Big Bang may occur once every 80 to 100 billion years. Where's the science in that? Because you might as well say once upon a time. What I've trained my kids to do is look for words like probably, could have, should have, might have. Because when you start identifying those, you realize this is simply a theory that they're using to eradicate God. Now, they got good pictures. In fact, They basically are saying, hey, 3.4 seconds, everything radiated out into this organized universe. A couple of problems with that. Number one, we still got the matter problem. Number two, in the scientific world, laws of thermodynamics, do things go to more ordered state or less ordered state? Less ordered state. If you don't believe me, park your car in your front yard, leave it there for about 50 years. Tell me what it looks like in 50 years. Everything moves towards chaos or disorder. But what about the other side of that? What about our position? Like if we were to put them on a scale and we say, all right, which one has the most evidence? Well, let's weigh it out for just a moment. So we'll start with matter. What does the Big Bang say? Big Bang basically says everything came from a little dot in space. In fact, this is the Discover issue, April 2002. You see the red dot in the middle right there? They would say that is the size of the universe at 10 to the minus 34 seconds before the Big Bang explosion. Now, I'm going to blow up the subheading on this cover, the part that I just put a box around, because I want you to read what they said on the front of this magazine. It said, the universe burst into something from absolutely nothing. Zero, nada. As it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. Where in the world do we see that in science? Oh, that's right, we don't. So according to the Big Bang Theory, all matter gave rise or came from nothing. Now, folks, a 10-year-old child, if I tell him, hey, go get a box, get a roll of duct tape. I want you to vacuum out that box, make sure there's nothing in it. Then I want you to tape it up, stick it in your closet for 50 years. What do you think is going to be in there? A 10-year-old child is smart enough to answer that question, right? But don't say nothing, because surely evolution is true, and we got palm trees, and we got rhinoceros, and we got nothing. By the way, if you did the same thing with tomato seeds, and you put them in an airtight bag, you stick them in a closet for 50 years, you get out, you plant them, put them in the ground, what would you grow? Don't say tomatoes. Because surely evolution is true, and you're going to get like rabbits, and you're going to get ferns, and you're going to get apple trees. Isn't it interesting? Things reproduce after their kind, just like the Bible indicates, right? So Big Bang says matter came from nothing. What about the Bible? It's interesting. If you look at the very first verse, and I want you to open your Bible to look at Genesis 1:1. I'm going to show you something some of you have never seen. The first verse of the Bible actually has the 5 scientific principles by which we measure everything. So in science, there's 5 things we use to measure everything: time, force, energy, space, and matter. Genesis 1:1 has all 5 of those. In the beginning, there's your time. God, there's your force. Created, there's your energy. The heavens, there's space. And the earth, there's matter. All 5 in just one verse. In fact, the next chapter, Genesis chapter 2, verse 4 goes on to say, this is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. So, over and over what we're seeing is, the Bible's very clear that this was a creation account. In fact, Paul put it this way. He said, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes have been clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. All these people that say they don't believe in God, Paul's saying, I'm taking that rug out from under you. Because when you look around, you see the handiwork of God. By the way, notice he says, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes have been clearly seen. That means somebody had to be here to do the seeing and the perceiving, right? That means man's been here from the beginning. So when you stop and weigh the evidence, which one is more scientific and logical? That everything came from nothing, or that a higher power created everything? Well, the more logical one, the more even scientific one is that creation model. Now somebody says, okay, but could God have used a Big Bang to get us to where we are today? Now, before I answer that, again, we got to think about where does that matter come from? But let's answer that question. All you really need to answer the question about the Big Bang is the first 2 verses of the Bible. Again, look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the surface of the waters. How does Moses describe the earth on that very first day? Well, what was the Spirit of God moving over? Waters. You ever thought about the fact that God hadn't brought forth land yet? It was literally a water ball in space. Now, think about that and then ask yourself, do we know the boiling temperature of water? Oh, yeah. It's either 212 or 100 degrees, depending on which system you use, right? At that temperature, water turns to steam. Now, folks, think about this. That Big Bang allegedly took place at a temperature you and I can't fathom. Millions of degrees. How do you go from a 1,000,000-degree explosion to having a water-covered heavenly body on the same day? Fact is, you can't. Add to that, according to the text, what day did the sun, the moon, the stars come into the picture? Day 4. Okay, follow me. According to God's word, there were plants on this earth before there was ever any other stuff out in space. Now, if you can squeeze that into a Big Bang, I'd love to hear how you're doing it. Because, folks, as they say in Texas, that dog won't hunt. By the way, it's not going to help you to stretch the days out either. I know that some people will be like, well, you know, maybe each one of them days is like 1,000,000 years. Well, the first thing I would point out to you is Moses did a pretty good job of describing the days, right? Look in Genesis 1, verse 5, verse 8, verse 13, over and over again, verse 19, he says the same phrase. So evening and morning were the first day. Evening and morning were the second day. Notice what he's doing. He's defining it as an evening and a morning, and he's putting a numerical adjective on it. Now look at day 14, or verse 14. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs, for season, for days, and for years. You're given 3 elements of time in one verse. Days, years, seasons. Guys, if each one of these is not really a 24-hour day as you and I recognize it, but rather millions of years, what's he talking about in verse 14? Or Exodus 20, verse 11, that says plainly, for in 6 days the Lord created the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is. Pretty simple, right? My wife, she travels with me a lot, or used to travel with me a whole lot. And she always would tell me, she's like, just keep it simple. So I'm going to give you a way to remember this, keeping it simple. On the screen behind me is a stargazer lily. I use that because we had those in our wedding, and I like brownie points, okay? If I were to ask you, what day were stargazer lily, all the plants created on? The answer, according to Scripture, is day 3, right? All right. Now let's get a little more specific. What does that stargazer lily need in order to reproduce, grow, thrive? Well, we know it's got to have water and sunlight, right? It also has to have the right atmosphere. We don't think about this, but it's got to have gravity, all the right nutrients in the soil, everything But that's a stargazer lily. Not only does it need sunlight and water, it also has to be what? Pollinated. In fact, those of you who have fruit trees, you know some of those actually have to be cross-pollinated, right? Okay, follow me. God put all the plants here on day. When did the flying creatures and the water dwellers come into the picture? You really think each one of these days was 1,000,000 years? God put all the stargazer lilies here on day 3, and you had to wait 2,000,000 years before they get pollinated? That doesn't work. Besides the fact that it just doesn't fit Scripture. By the way, where'd their water come from? Bible says water first, then land, right? Evolution says, no. There was this cosmic explosion, finally cooled down over millions of years. Then we got water. To which I would look at an evolutionist and say, where'd you get your water, buddy? Actually, I had a university professor heckling me one time. He was sitting there, and I hear him say, that would be the water cycle. To which I politely said, good try, Sparky, but in order to have a water cycle, you first got to have what? You got to have water. Now, you're going to be happy to know, in 2009, they finally figured out where the earth got all of its water. According to scientists, it was delivered by meteorites. Couple of problems with that. Problem number 1, we have never seen a meteorite deliver water to the earth. Problem number 2, what happens when a meteorite hits our atmosphere? They can't even explain water. And yet over and over again, this is the theory they're teaching our kids. Here's the way I want you to think about it. When it comes to complexity. So, if I were to invite you to come to our house on a Sunday morning, our house on Sunday morning is controlled chaos, okay? When my kids were little, I told you guys we were always looking for Bibles, belts, shoes. Now, today, it is Reese is going to preach in Mount Pleasant, Will's going to Burns, Tennessee, Dad's going to be somewhere. And so breakfast at our house is what we call do-it-yourself breakfast, which means we line up granola bars, cereal boxes, and you fend for yourself. So imagine coming to my house on a Sunday morning. You sit down at the table, cereal boxes are lined up, but you notice one of them has spilled over. And when you look closely at that, you notice there's a message in the cereal. Now, if I asked you, how many of you think that happened by chance? Let me rephrase that. How many of you in this room think you could take a box of cereal and dump it out repeatedly and get that particular phraseology within a day or two? Folks, you could dump out cereal the rest of your life and you wouldn't get that particular combination of letters. If you really want to know who the intelligent designer behind that would be Mom, right? That's just 5 words, though, by the way. Take out the garbage, Mom. If we were to compare those 5 words to the DNA strand of a simple, a one-celled amoeba, how long do you think the DNA strand for a single cell amoeba is? Because if you can't get 5 words by chance, how are you going to get the DNA code for an amoeba by chance? By the way, the DNA code for a single cell amoeba is equivalent to 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia. 1,000 volumes. Do I think there's evidence for a God? I think it's screaming out his name. Inside every cell of your body, There is a code that took us over a dozen years to figure out. We still don't know how it was put together, where the parts came from. But you know what it's yelling? It's yelling that, yeah, there's an intelligent being up there that put it together. Some of you recognize the name Anthony Flew. Was an atheist for about 80 years of his life. One of our Christian brothers, a guy named Tom Warren, actually debated Anthony Flew on the existence of God. At the end of his life, Anthony Flew finally said, there has to be a God. The evidence is overwhelming. We sent him a bunch of apologetics material. He ended up writing a book. And in that book, he said this: it now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. Folks, he's right. I mean, when you stop and think about it, if the Big Bang were true, we wouldn't see the design we see in nature, human body, the universe, but it's all around us. Now, I got a whole bunch more slides back there. I probably got about 100, but I want enough time for you guys to ask me questions. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to let Mr. David grab a microphone, and we're going to open it up for your comments, your questions. Kind of like we did last night. If you've got a comment, a question, raise your hand. And here's what I really want you to do. I want you to have them run that way and then back this way and then that way. Up in the sound booth, we got a question.
Yeah, can you speak to carbon dating?
Absolutely. What about carbon dating? So most of you in this room have heard carbon dating, dates stuff really, really old. Several problems with carbon dating, okay? In fact, there are 7 assumptions that all have to be correct in order for carbon dating to be correct. We know of at least 3 of those that aren't correct, which throws the whole dating method into problems. I'm going to give you 1 or 2. So carbon dating demands that everything has been uniform since the beginning of time, which means there's not been any volcanoes, no wildfires, no nuclear reactors that have had spills, no problems of any kind. Because think about this. If we were suddenly fossilized tonight, and a group by Mount St. Helens fossilized tonight, and a group in Japan where the reactor went down, if they were fossilized, we all died the same night, they come back in 10,000 years and date us, we should date the same, right? Because we died the same night. The people up by Mount St. Helens have been ingesting more radioactive carbon from a little volcano called Mount St. Helens. And so they would actually date younger than we do. But let me make it a little more basic and explain how it works. So you and I, we take in a radioactive form of carbon from the plants and the animals that we eat. Carbon-14, don't freak out, it's not going to kill you. Very, very little amount of it. The thought process is when you die, that radioactive material starts to break down at what we think is a constant rate. So they believe the half-life of carbon-14 is 5,730 years. So that means every 5,730 years, you would lose half the amount of carbon-14. So, for instance, let me give you a very simple one. We find a bone that's got 10 radioactive units. I've got 20. So I've got 20. This thing's got 10. That means it's lost half. So that bone should be 5,730 years. Couple of problems with that. Number one, nobody's lived 5,730 years to know for sure that that's the half-life. But I want you to follow me for a minute. So we find a bone that's got 10. We say that's 5,730 years. All right, let's cut that in half. So now we got one that's got 5 radioactive units. How old would that be? That would be about, you do the math, it's been gone that long, about 10,000 years old. Cut it in half again. So now we're at 2.5 radioactive units. We're about, I'm rounding to 15,000 years old. Cut it in half again. We're about 1.75 radioactive units. Do you realize you are getting into decimal points and you're not even 20,000 years old? In order for something to be millions of years old, it's going to be 0.00 something, which begs the question, could that have simply been an artifact? The other problem, and this one drives me absolutely insane. I don't normally talk to my TV, but when I see them say, oh yeah, that dinosaur bone was dated at X million years old using carbon dating, folks, that is one of the biggest lies. Like if I find, let's say I find a T-Rex bone, I carbon date it, it's got 37 radioactive units in it. How old is that dinosaur bone? There's not a human being alive that can tell me. You know why? Because in order for you to know how old that bone is, you have to have a living specimen to know how much it's lost. You don't know if a living one had 370, 39, 3 billion. You don't have a clue. And so what are they really doing? Guesstimating. Carbon dating has actually been abandoned because it wasn't giving them dates old enough. They're now going after potassium argon, some of the other that really measures things in the hundreds of thousands of years. So to answer your question, do I put a whole lot of faith in it? No. Do I think there's some assumptions and problems with it? Yes. Do real scientists use it to date things? No. Good question. Other questions, comments? Right here. Oh, we'll go over here first and then back over here.
Me first? Okay, so I noticed that in Genesis chapter 6, because you had mentioned about the dinosaurs, that God says, I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them all out along with the earth. So I think that is, he's talking about the dinosaurs, but I don't know.
Okay, so are you at Genesis chapter 6, verse what?
Verse 13.
Verse 13, okay. So God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. If you skip on down to verse 17, behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which there is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. And so her comment is, I've always taken that to think that that's when the dinosaurs died out. Skip on down, though, to verse 19 and 20. Of every living thing, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, of every creeping thing on the earth after its kind, 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. So do I think that maybe that's when the vast majority of them were wiped out? Yeah. One of the things that I did not mention to you guys when we were talking about the dinosaurs and the flood, I don't think they thrived anymore after the flood. I think prior to the flood, in the paradise Eden environment, them being vegetarians, God made this cool tropical rainforest-like environment. I think they were thriving in that. I think after the flood, jet streams were changed. Suddenly we've got an ice age. Polar caps freeze up. They're cold-blooded creatures. They don't have as far as they can roam. And so I don't think they were thriving as much anymore. So, good question.
Before I ask my question, I would like to thank you because I learned a lot for this
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate
event
that.
of the church, and hopefully there will be more like this in the future.
Thank you.
So my question is, probably it's more of a personal question. Have you been like a creationist or a scientist first and before creationist?
Okay,
Or-
have I been creationist first, scientist first? I have always held a belief in God, always. What I discovered in school was the more further along in my medical training I got, the more belief I had in God because things were far, far too complex. And so it actually strengthened my faith. I can still remember to this day, I was in a clinical research lab where at one point we were doing live recordings from human brain. So one of the unique things about the brain is it doesn't have nerve endings. You can poke it and you don't feel anything. It's kind of cool. So we were taking electrodes, dropping them down into the brain. We'd put a little electricity through it and you'd see what part of the body that would correspond to. Maybe they would speak, maybe they would move something. And I remember distinctly, I'm looking through one set of stereo microscopes. There's a Chinese neurosurgeon right across from me. So we're looking down. And I remember raising up and asking the guy across from me, do you think this ever could have happened by chance? He raised up, looked around, and this was one of those weird occasions where there were no attending nurses around us, nobody. They were off counting needles or something, but we were literally kind of by ourselves. He raised up, looked around, looked at me and goes, not a chance in the world. He said, you don't get this kind of complexity without something. And about that time, a nurse walked into our field of view and he shut up and he wouldn't talk about it anymore. Because it is politically incorrect and possibly suicide in academia to hold to anything other than evolution.
Briefly explain light was created the first day, but the sun was not created till the fourth day. Explain the difference there.
Say that again.
Light was created the first day,
Yes,
but the sun that gives life wasn't created till the fourth day.
correct. So how do you measure days if the sun didn't come along until day 4? It's a great question. We don't actually use the sun to measure days. I know we think we do. What is a day? A day is actually one complete revolution of the earth. So as long as the earth is spinning, can we mark time? Was there a temporary, some kind of a light source there on day 1? Well, let's go back and look. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now, next question you're going to ask me is, what was that light? And the answer is, we don't know for sure. I've heard many theories. Some people say, well, that's light energy. That's when God created all the atoms he would need for his creation. Other folks say, no, that was a temporary light that God used. You know, we think locally our own solar system, but God was creating a whole universe, right? Some folks have said that's Jesus. There's some issues with that one I won't go into. But the point being, if there was light there, and there was, and if the earth already had a spin, and folks, I mean, it only makes sense that God is going. God, I don't see him putting plants and animals and then going, all right, everybody, merry-go-round time, hold on, and then putting the spin on it. I think the spin was here to begin with, which means we could count time. Yeah, I follow it.
We tapped into light without the sun. We see it around from the lights here. We tapped into the sun. There's light here,
But there's no sunlight.
Right, and so we can still mark time. Even if you go into a cave, can you still mark time? Yeah. Yeah.
How big was a baby Spinosaurus?
How big was which dinosaur?
A baby
A baby dinosaur. So, a Spinosaurus.
A baby
A
one.
baby? So an egg from a Spinosaurus was about that big. Which means a baby would be about that big. But that baby probably grew a lot faster than your brother grew. Like when he would eat, he wouldn't just eat a few little chicken nuggets. He would eat like a whole tree. And he would grow and grow and grow. Good question.
They say that light travels at a certain speed, and we have these stars that we can see millions of years away, so it takes millions of years for the light to get here. Perhaps when God created the light, that's what he created, the light that was supposed to come from those places to get
Okay,
here.
so I'm going to go ahead and answer a question he didn't even pose, that he kind of posed. And that is, how could stuff be young if it takes gazillions of years for light to reach us here and we're just now seeing it? And he did kind of address this, and that is, maybe God created, well, we know God created a mature creation. How do I know that? Because he turned to Adam and Eve and he said, you can eat of the fruit of any of these trees except this one, which means those trees were already bearing what? Fruit. Now think about this. If let's say John, David, and I, we get invited to go back in time to the very first wedding, right? God is going to bring Adam and Eve together. We get invited. We're excited about that. We know we're supposed to take a gift, but we're guys. We're not taking China, right? What we're going to take, we put our heads together and we decide to buy Adam a big old McCullough chainsaw. We take a can of gas back with us. Adam goes out in the garden. He fires that thing up. He cuts down a tree. How many rings would that tree have? Because that tree is only 2 or 3 days old. But it's already producing what? Fruit. So God created a mature creation. That's point number one. Point number two, and this one you can double check me on. 2 laboratories have now conducted studies in which they've shown that something we've always thought was a constant, the speed of light, is actually not a constant out in space. They've done experiments with it in a vacuum, and light, not only does it travel faster, they think it travels exponentially faster because it doesn't have our gravitational well holding it back, which means all this time that we've been measuring distance from us to stars using millions of years and a constant, guess what? That's no good. Good question.
So some people say, well, you know, if the sun, moon, and stars were created on the 4th day, how could 3 days be marked before then? How could there be 3 days before day 4? And the answer in verse 14 is that those, the sun, moon, and stars were, it says, created to be signs. So they don't make time, they mark time.
Exactly. Yeah. Time was already started in the beginning. That's when the stopwatch was pressed, so to speak. Good point. Very good point. Other comments?
Is there evidence about the eras?
Is there evidence about the...
Eras, like different time periods, Jurassic periods, and so different...
Oh, man, he caught me. All right. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to fast forward very, very quickly, okay? So bear with me for just a second. You guys are missing all the good, like we all came from one race thing. I'm not even going to go there. It's right after this. Okay. His question is all the different layers, all the different alleged times, Jurassic period, Triassic period. So if you look on the screen, it's what they call the geologic column. I got a couple of different ones. This is a staple in most of the textbooks. What they've done is they have artificially said, okay, this layer we're going to call this, and we're going to say it's so many million years old. What they didn't realize is we have fossils that are going through several different layers. This is a fossilized tree. That's 5 different fossilized trees. You'll notice the men right here at the bottom. This tree actually started growing in what they call the Carboniferous period, 250 million years ago. It actually grows up through what they would say is the Triassic, which means that tree apparently just hung around for over 100 million years. We found these things quite literally everywhere. This is a picture we took in Nova Scotia. This is in Joggins. This is in Alabama. So the short answer to your question is, I don't put a lot of faith in those. I do know there's layers because I can see them. I think a better explanation for the layers is there was a global flood and stuff settled out according to its weight. So like heavier stuff, they sank. Things that had a lot of fat that was able to float probably kind of stuck up here somewhere. I think some of the plants that were covered in wax or cellulose probably floated all the way to the top. And so you got different layers of sand, rock, stuff. And if I had lots and lots of times, I could show you that because we actually have video proof of it at Mount St. Helens. Good question. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Yes, ma'am.
You just brought up Mount St. Helens, and okay, I've heard people say that the Grand Canyon and that it happened over millions of years ago, and yet with Mount St. Helens, what are the canyons in that now?
Yeah, so she's wanting me to go into a whole nother seminar, which that's fine, we can do that. So my son and I, we were there for the 30th anniversary, believe it or not. How long do you guys think that was? 44 years ago. Yeah, you are that old, okay? At the base of that volcano, there are canyons about 600 feet deep. So those of you who've been there, you've seen what I'm talking about. The canyons were actually made in 2 days. How do we know that? Well, what happened is this mountain's growing at a rate of, I tell young people, the week before it blew, 15 feet a day in girth. It's like a big zit just waiting to rupture. All the snow on the north face slid down into the valley. It blew. What do you think happens to snow and ice when it comes in contact with that kind of heat and lava? It turned to steam. And it had to go somewhere. And it blew vents out 600 feet deep. I've got some really cool pictures of them in 2 days. Not 200 million years, 2,000, just 2 days. By the way, they tell you that the Grand Canyon was carved out over millions of years by the Colorado River. Probably everybody in here was taught that. That Colorado River had nothing to do with carving that canyon. And the reason I know that is because if you look geographically, there's a Navajo Indian reservation right where the river enters the canyon. If you look at the elevation, it's about 2,300 feet, okay? If you don't believe me, take your GPS, go to the Navajo Indian reservation. You'll be about 2,200 feet in elevation. The south rim that everybody loves to look out after is sitting at 6,900 feet. Which means in order for that river to have carved the canyon, water would actually have to flow uphill over 3,000 feet in elevation. Now, I'm not a hydrologist, but I do know water seeks its lowest level. That's a whole nother seminar. We'll get in next time. Yes, ma'am.
Having been raised in the public school system and in church simultaneously, I always felt as if, the Bible did not give us enough evidence, but once you've been doing this for years. You've been presenting this information. The first time we've heard you about 20 years ago, it blew my mind. I thought, whoa, wait, the evidence has always been there, and scientists have always had the evidence. However, because of their worldview, they hid that, what it was really pointing to, and they came up with their
theories.
And we accepted it hook, line, and sinker.
Yep.
And now that our eyes are opened to that, the Bible is true, 7 days of creation and all this and dinosaurs. Now when John and I go around the country and we see evidence, we can say, oh, that's evidence of the global flooding. Oh, that is this. It's always been there, but Satan has been really good at hiding the truth from Christians.
Yep. I'm going to read Romans 1:18 because it fits so beautifully with what she just said. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. There were people back then suppressing the truth. And we got people today suppressing the truth and doing exactly what Adolf Hitler said, which is tell a lie big enough, loud enough, people are going to believe it. And they do. I promise you guys, what I'm showing you today is literally like out of what I've got on my slide deck in my computer, this is just a little piece of it. I got loads of this stuff that if you were an intellectually honest person, you would look at it and go, okay, I can't refute. I mean, maybe I could refute one or two little things, but I can't refute all of that, which means there has to be a creator. I've taken several atheists, some of them rabid atheists, and through patience and through love and through a relationship, we have walked together. And I tell them the same thing. I'll tell you the same thing. As long as you're willing to study with me and not be closed-minded, but willing to examine the evidence, I will study with you as long as you will. And eventually, they have that aha moment where they realize, okay, I tried for as long as I could to say that it wasn't possible, but eventually they have that moment where it's like, yeah, all of this can't be wrong. I appreciate very much you saying that. Anything else before we let you guys go? One or two, and then I'm going to let you guys go because we'll get ready for worship tomorrow. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on Pangea, and does that fit in with the
Okay,
Bible?
that's a great question. So what about Pangea? And I always have to tell the older people, that's Pangea, not Panera, the bread company, okay? Turn in your Bible and look with me at, I'm going to give you something I don't want you to use. Look with me at Genesis chapter 10. Verse 25 says, to Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Please don't turn to that and say, oh, that's when all the land, when Pangea happened. So Pangea is the idea that everything was once kind of a supercontinent. There was one landmass. And that over time, everything divided. My opinion is that stuff probably was closer together. The problem I have with Pangea is they'll show our students, our kids, a picture of Africa and South America, really good fit, right? And they'll say they're separating by like 0.33 millimeters a year, like a really, and so they extrapolate the distance and say, oh, it had to take a quadrillion years to get to that point, right? What are they assuming? A slow, constant separation. Is it possible that God in his wrath tore things apart at the flood? Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. On that day, the fountains of the great deep were broke up, the windows of heaven were open. I don't think God approached killing everything with a quiet, meek, and gentle spirit. I think he was mad. And I think he wiped out everything. And I think in doing that, he ripped some continents apart. So do I think that things were closer? I do. Do I think they're just now kind of settling in and we're getting the tectonic activity? Yeah, I do. We're going to go here, and I'm going to let you have the last one. Or we'll do two more. Yeah.
I don't believe that the world is the same today as it was before the flood. But I believe that it was after the animals were released from the ark and people spread up, maybe the Tower of Babel or whatever, God separated the people. And then I think is when he separated the continents. And I also believe that as these continents moved, that things like the Himalayas grew, or the Rocky Mountains grew as these continents moved.
He is so taking my lesson tomorrow. Everybody turn in your Bible to Psalm 104. And look with me. It's talking specifically about the flood. Look with me at verses 5 and following. It says, you who laid the foundations of the earth, so that it should not be moved forever. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the voice of your thunder they hastened away. You stretched the mountains up. You pulled the valleys down to the place which you founded for them. You have set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth. He's talking about the flood. And he's saying, after the flood, God literally pulled mountains up and stretched valleys down to accommodate some of the water. Do we have trenches in the ocean like the Marianas Trench that hold a whole lot of water today? Yeah, we do. Great question. All right. I think we got two more little guys, and then I'm going to let you guys out of here. Yeah.
When did you first become a Christian?
When did I first become a Christian? I started asking, so I grew up in the Methodist church, and when I was about 15, I started asking, why do we do this? Why do we observe Lent? Why do we have acolytes? Why do we have all that? And most people just kept saying, well, that's tradition, that's how we do it. But I knew there had to be something more. And so eventually, as I got a little bit older, I ended up studying with a guy, and he showed me the New Testament church as it's laid out in the book of Acts. And I tell people, and it's kind of true, it was like scales kind of came off my eyes, and I was like, whoa, I did not even realize that was in the Bible. And it was on that occasion that I said, hey, we got to go to the water. I want a part of this. And so I was 19, 20 years of age when I really became a Christian. As I said, I believed God all my life, but I made the decision to repent, to be immersed, and to follow him when I was a little bit older. So, good question. Last one, right over here.
What's your favorite dinosaur?
What is my favorite dinosaur? Oh. So, everybody always says T-Rex, and so I don't say T-Rex because that one's so common. If I had to guess, I would say it's either going to be like a velociraptor or like an ankylosaurus, because I think those are really cool. I also love a triceratops just because they look cool. So tomorrow morning we continue, okay? I don't know where everybody normally is on Sunday morning. I don't know who's visiting here. So I'm not trying to steal sheep. In fact, if you normally go to a different congregation, like if you're a preacher somewhere else, just put a sign on the door that says, hey, we're meeting Southwest in the morning. No, in all seriousness, we would love to have you. We are going to investigate the flood. We're going to dive deep into it, look at some things maybe you've never thought about. And then during worship hour, we're going to get really personal and hopefully impact everybody's lives in this room. So please make plans to join us. We'd love to have you. For those of you who've wondered, David, they've got all my PowerPoints back there. And my understanding is they're putting all this stuff online somewhere. so that you can go back, you can look at it again if you want to, take a look at their website. There is some material outside that is available. If I was going to suggest one book, there's a red and white book out there with a fingerprint on it called Convicted that has all of this stuff that I just was talking about, the flood, dinosaurs, fossil man, ice age. It's got pictures in it for those of you who need pictures. If I were going to recommend one book to kind of encapsulate most of this, that would be the one I would point to.
Thank you, guys. Give Brad a round of applause here, please. Yeah. Yes, thank you very, very much for coming out, and I hope that you learned something. I hope your faith was strengthened by the evidence that exists. A lot of times it gets hidden from us, you know, and Satan does a really good job of that. Now it's our job to go out and take the message out to the world. So whether it be your place of work, your school, your friends, it's our job to deliver the message, not just the love of Christ, which absolutely we should, but then also the evidence that exists for God's creation. So